First of all, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming today and for listening, and we hope that you'll find some information helpful and that you'll be engaged in our questioning time. A little bit about Oregon City the Oregon City Homeless Solutions Coalition. It actually started out with that name, and I'll get to our new name here in just one second. I'm going to move this forward. So in 2016, a number of us here in the Oregon City area gathered together to talk about homelessness and what we could do to help this huge community challenge. The first thing we did was we started by listening. As we knew that we couldn't solve the problem that we didn't understand. So we reached out to the community, to government, service providers, mental health specialists, the faith community, schools, and the homeless. And we asked them questions, and we asked them what their needs were, and we asked them what solutions that they thought would be important. We next moved to collaboration. We learned that many people and organizations were working very hard to make a difference, but efforts were often uncoordinated. We came to understand that our community needed to create a more united, coordinated set of solutions, which led us to our purpose. We created the Homeless Solutions Coalition with a purpose as follows: facilitate solutions to homeless by collaborating with community partners, specializing in services to bring hope and steer those affected by homelessness to a more independent and sustainable living. That led us to supporting our service providers. The coalition learned that we could make a big difference if we could build bridges between service providers, government agencies, healthcare specialists, educators, law enforcement, and many others. We learned, though, in short order, that the effort didn't just have a boundary around Oregon City. So we expanded our name to be Clackamas County. And that moved us from the Oregon City Homeless Solutions Coalition to Clackamas County Homeless Solution Coalition. Homeless affects all cities and towns in Clackamas County, and so therefore our expansion. We've got a great panel of speakers today, and I'll be introducing them now, and they'll come up. We'll have about a 3 to 5 minute presentation from each one. Then we have a set of 3 questions that I'll be asking each of them to answer. And then after that point, we'll have audience questions you can write on the card. So the first speaker that we have today is Becky Wilkinson. And Becky comes from Providence. And she is the program manager there of a program called Better Outcomes Through Bridges. And Becky, come on up and tell us about that program.
Thank you for having me. So I work for Providence in our regional behavioral health department. The BOB programs serve all of Oregon. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we execute that work all across the state, but mostly in Clackamas County. So a little bit more about BOB. We are outreach and peer-focused programs, meaning when I say outreach, we do most of our work in the community. Even though we're attached to Providence, and we work out of emergency departments, clinics, inpatient units, we really focus on meeting our clients where they're at, and so that means literally and figuratively in the community. So this is a list of all of our programs. In Clackamas County, we currently have our emergency department outreach program, which focuses on working with folks who come into the emergency department frequently. We meet them in the hospital and follow working with them out in the community. We also have our Caring Contacts program in Clackamas County, which is an emergency department, a peer-delivered follow-up call. So folks that come into our EDs in crisis, we make a call to every single patient who has discharged within 48 hours to make sure that they have all the resources they need to get to follow-ups. And if they need a little bit more assistance, we will work with them in person to go ahead and get that. So a little bit about what we do. I mentioned we are community-based. Our model really focuses on not only our community partnerships with the folks here on this panel, but also making sure that we're executing our work in a person-centered way. And so, meaning our patients, our clients guide their care. We do not tell people they need to get sober. We do not tell people they need to take their medication. We really just walk alongside them and guide them in how they want their care to look like. And what we've found over time is that by just building that trusting relationship with folks, some of the other things fall into place, right? So then they tend to feel safe and they are, willing to go into the doctor, whereas maybe before that was a big barrier. They are trusting us to help them navigate different systems. As we all know, navigating the healthcare system is challenging. So there's lots of things that we do to execute that with folks. As you can see, I included some photos up here of some of the work we do in the community. We have a couple of tiny home village partnerships in different communities where we are able to use dedicated tiny homes for our clients in exchange for working on site, providing case management and peer-delivered services. We do regular street outreach events in the community, so we take our donated supplies, deliver them to different camps all around. We are up in the top right supporting LoveOne. So we have some of our outreach and peer support specialists that go on site with LoveOne and actually Father's Heart and meet with folks. We set up a table, give supplies. We are OHP assisters. We help folks get signed up for OHP, anything folks need. And then up on the top left, I wanted to highlight that most of our team, I mentioned we are made up of outreach and peer support specialists. A peer support specialist is somebody that has their own lived experience, meaning a mental health condition, substance use disorder, maybe they were homeless themselves. So they are now certified through the state of Oregon, and we have a whole team of peers. And we have peers doing work out of multiple different avenues within the hospital system. And so that you can see DJ, who's the blonde woman, she, along with other peers, take in their stories and share it. She went to Coffee Creek Correctional Facility and shared her story with inmates there. Our folks we're always putting them in platforms to be able to share how their own experiences have influenced the work that they do. And then up at the top left, right next to that photo, that's a couple of our peers, one of the doctors that we work with, and a client. So it was a former client that we worked with in one of our substance use programs, and he came back to speak to the doctors that treated him when he was in the hospital. He talked about his experience and shared what was impactful. And to be honest, in that story, I won't go into too much depth, but he was really resistant. He was really resistant to even working with a peer. He was angry, he was detoxing, he was sick, he was stuck in the hospital for weeks. And the minute our peer walked in the room, and he actually, I know this because he told me this, and he actually wrote me a letter. But the minute our peer walked in the room, he noticed her tattoos everywhere, she's loud. She came in and just listened, and he said that was the most impactful thing that anybody could have done. She sat down and spent that extra time with him to listen to his story. And through that, relationship building, like I mentioned before, is really what made him want to get clean and sober. She was there the entire time along the way, going to AA meetings, helping him navigate services and housing. So that's just an example of what we do. And I'm really happy that you all invited me here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. One of the things that we appreciate most at the Oregon City Business Alliance is our sponsors of our events. It's something new that we just started, and it's so new that we forgot to introduce our sponsor of our event this morning. So it's my pleasure to introduce Sonia Fisher, who's going to come up. Clackamas County generously sponsored this luncheon today, and she has a few words.
Thank you, Dan. Isn't that inspiring, just hearing our first presenter talk about how to deliver homeless services? Thank you so much, Becky, for the important perspective. So, Clackamas County, it is our goal. We are striving to make homelessness and housing instability rare, short, and not reoccurring. Our board is engaged on this effort. You're going to hear from our staff with Vahid Brown later on this morning, or this afternoon, or this almost noon, to talk about precisely what we are doing. But some of the things I just want to highlight that I'm so proud of in our community, the collaborations which are here, help us execute a philosophy of providing services to individuals where they're at in a way that looks at their individualized person, their needs, and it is the way that we will be able to make housing instability rare, short, and not reoccurring. Couple little highlights to mention: our housing bond through Metro, we were anticipated to do about 841 units. We have doubled that capacity. We have 1,500 already signed, sealed, and delivered, and more in the pipeline to more than double our leveraging of those dollars. In regards to right now, in this moment, with our capacity building for our homeless support dollars, we have stably housed 294 individuals in just, yes, that does need an applause. And for Vahid Brown and our team, for sure, in Clackamas County. So, because our board wanted to host and sponsor this event, we just want everyone to know that we are absolutely in partnership with our community. And what makes Clackamas County so unique and stand out is that we do things the Clackamas way. I call it Clackamas-centric, and that's why we will succeed in making homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Very, very, very good words. Our next presenter today is Brandi Johnson. Brandi is Executive Director of an organization, nonprofit here that's based in Oregon City called LoveOne, does phenomenal work through laundry and events and traipsing down in the canyon a couple times. So come on, Brandi, and tell us a lot more about what you do.
So, Executive Director of LoveOne since 2021 officially. What we do. So LoveOne started in 2012 providing free laundry. We identified that as a significant need for many folks, whether they're housed or unhoused. Laundry is expensive, and folks experiencing poverty often don't have access to washers and dryers in wherever they're living. So we provide laundry. We expanded to providing hygiene supplies and on-site wraparound supports. Like Becky mentioned, we have the Providence Bob team on site. We partner with Outside In for harm reduction services. Recently, we've had Cricket Wireless helping folks get connected to cell phones and consistent service. We partner with local organizations, faith communities. We are almost entirely run on volunteers. We have 3 staff at the moment, and that provides an amazing opportunity to connect with so many community members at our events. So we do provide hygiene supplies, and that occurs at laundry and shower events. So now we'll go to showers. We provided laundry, and then, as you all know, the pandemic hit. And things really got crazy. Not only did we see an increase in need for laundry, but we started seeing folks coming to events who had infections and infestations at a rate we had never before seen, and unable to access basic medical care for various reasons. And we had folks with infected spider bites using pocket knives to carve out those infections. We had lice, people coming with lice crawling into their eyes. And I just thought, this is this is an opportunity for us to figure out a solution. And that is a very short version of how we ended up with a shower cart. We started out asking for hand washing stations to be deployed in Clackamas County so there would be access to soap and water because hand sanitizer just wasn't sufficient for what we were seeing. Our community prosecutor, Bill Stewart, who is a Rotarian, decided that a shower cart was actually the route to go. Why stop at hand washing when you can wash the whole body? And so he fundraised for a shower cart for us, and in partnership with Rotary, we run that shower cart 3 times a month here in Clackamas County. People get clean underwear, clean underclothes, and 15 minutes in a shower, hot or cold, depending on the outside temperature. This last weekend was really warm and people wanted cold showers. But they get all of their supplies, and all of that provides an opportunity for us to build those trusting relationships that Becky also mentioned. Building relationships, getting to know names and faces. We don't always have the resources to solve all of the problems, but what we can do is acknowledge our human neighbors as human and recognize their preferences, their names, and speak to that part of all of our collective humanness. And often it's just being willing to listen, like Becky also mentioned, coming in and listening and hearing what somebody actually has to say. I can't count the number of times our neighbors have come up and thanked me in words to the effect, "Thank you for not treating me like trash. Thank you for not treating me like garbage." Not, "It was so great to see you. Thanks for talking about whatever, what soap I like." It's literally, "Thank you for not treating me like garbage." And to provide an opportunity for respect and mutual relationship is a big component of what LoveOne does, and we use laundry and showers as the avenue for that. If we could go to the next slide. Another impact of the pandemic is that we started hearing about not only, so a couple of my coordinators work in the school system, and they were starting to hear about kiddos who no longer had access to the Backpack Buddies program because school was transitioning home and via Zoom. And so we got connected with the USDA Farm to Table program and started distributing food boxes to the tune of 70-some thousand pounds in just a couple of months. And we always ran out. And then when that program was discontinued, we looked for a new way to start providing food into particularly vulnerable communities. And that looks like, right now, we run a weekly food pantry out in Redland at the Grange. We have a team that hauls food from Clackamas Service Center, so they are a huge supporter of what we do and provide most all of the food that we distribute. Our team sets up, and within 15 minutes, the food is gone. So there's room for more growth. I like to look at that as growth opportunity there. All right, and then the next slide, another component of what LoveOne does is outreach. So we partnered recently so we do a lot of this work in conjunction with Clackamas, or Central City Concerns Clackamas Lead Program. Glenn's over there. We do outreach out in Newell Creek Canyon. I have more to talk about that later with some other questions, but we recently partnered with Maddie with Northwest Family Services to come out and do a CHA assessment on site to 2 individuals who have been out there, one of whom has been outside camping since she was 16. And has essentially finished raising herself and has been through a lot of traumatic incidents. And so Maddie hiked out, crossed those 2 logs that you see in the creek, and traipsed uphill in the mud. It's pretty clear, it was pretty muddy, and did a CHA assessment. They pulled out their wagon, and we were able to kind of set up a little makeshift desk. And yes, CHA stands for Coordinated Housing Access, and so that's the screening process that folks go through to get entered into the system, and then we're able to pull from that for housing and case management, and Vahid and Jennifer can speak more to that. And so those 2, I'm happy to report, now have a housing voucher and are looking for places where they can be inside and start to thrive instead of just survive. And the last photo will also be tied to a story I will share later, but that is Sarah and I out in the canyon. One of the neighbors is going to be moving into housing, and he had a chicken coop. And we needed to find a safe home for his chickens. And Sarah was able to coordinate with a friend who took the chickens and is going to be collecting the eggs and giving them back to the individual. So he's extra excited because for those of you who are chicken fans, you might know that what the eggs look like show how happy your chickens are. And so he's going to be able to monitor how happy his chickens are by the eggs. So really what we do with LoveOne is building relationships, building trust, getting to know people, and all of that allows us to be ready when folks are ready for their next step, because we build those relationships with other organizations. And recently, there's been a housing project called Tukwila Springs off Webster Road. And collectively, those of us working together, particularly Jennifer with Father's Heart and Glenn with LEAD, we have been able to get 8 people into that facility. We've got someone in Veterans Village. We've gotten multiple people housing vouchers through a high vulnerability panel where we can escalate the most urgent need. And we made 8 more referrals into Tukwila just this morning and helped one of our first folks move in. So we came straight from there to here. And it's a good day to be able to talk about those things. So thank you.
So when you look around and you have a feeling like nothing's going on, things are going on. You know, when you've got a county worker coming out in the mud to do a county housing assessment, and you got people like Brandi and Glenn traipsing down, building relationships with the homeless in the canyon so that that can occur, that's how it's done. One person at a time. That's how it's done. Great work, great work. Okay, next, Jennifer Morris is from the Father's Heart. They're located just up the street. They do a lot of good work in the homeless in a lot of ways. Jennifer, come and share with us about your operation and what you do.
Thank you, Dan. So I come to you all with lots of lived experience. I actually have a lifetime of lived experience. So I'll share briefly with you about that so that you can understand the compassion I come from in the work I do. So I grew up with 2 addicted parents, was a product of the foster system. I was a homeless teen mom, also became addicted and homeless as an adult, where I was I was downtown Portland homeless, and I found that there weren't a lot of services for women. And because I spoke well and because I was well put together, people didn't want to help me. And that was really difficult to understand. So I found a community that was willing to support me and cared about me enough to support me in changing my life and helping me to see a new path and a new direction. I've been working in homeless services for over 6 years. I've been at the Father's Heart for 5. This year, January 2022, I became the executive director of the Father's Heart. Our board decided that I was the one that would help us change the direction of homeless services for our agency. I have recently brought on new partnerships such as Outside In for harm reduction services, CAP, Cascade AIDS Project for testing, and I have built great partnerships with LoveOne, Bob, LEAD, Vahid Brown, Chief, and our homeless liaison, Dan Haynes. I work very closely with him. At the Father's Heart, we serve over 10,000 meals a year. We serve 3 meals a day, 5 days a week. We're open Monday through Friday. We do over 6,000 showers a year. And with that, we let people guide their own path. We listen, we build relationships, we build trust. And I come to my team with the same, I like to say, let's serve love first. If we can put on some love goggles and look past their current situation and really see the person for who they are and listen to what they need and how they see their way out of a situation, we begin to work on those goals. So we have an on-site case manager who is also a public health nurse. She is CHA trained, Coordinated Housing Access, and we do referrals into detox, treatment centers, clean and sober housing. The statistics prior to, which I'm hoping Vahid will talk about, prior to SHS coming on board, very few people in Clackamas County were getting housed every year. So many of our folks were on wait lists for 5+ years. That system, unfortunately, at this time is designed that if you haven't been homeless for a year or longer, you can't get a referral into housing. And so unfortunately, those folks, by the time they've been homeless for a year, have lost hope. And they are not feeling good. That's when we see people spiral, essentially. And trying to draw them back into hope is very difficult. So we've begun to raise hope again. We've been a part of housing over 94 people. We have been running the hotel shelter program for Clackamas County since December of 2020. That's literally touched hundreds of lives. There will be over 120 folks housed specifically out of that program just this year. And we have housed, we have 30 folks housed through a severe weather event for folks who were extremely vulnerable. And so we will continue to run that program for Clackamas County. We are excited to be a part of that. We are looking forward to getting to bring on new programs and supportive services for folks. And I can't do it without these partnerships. I can't do it without Brandi and Bob program. I work closely with Alex at the Bob program, and I work closely with Glenn and Wendy from LEAD, and often we're brainstorming to come up with solutions and resources. So thank you so much for allowing me to share what we do, and we really appreciate the support.
I think the Father's heart is in very good hands. And it was fun at a meeting. I was at a meeting the other day, and Brandi and Jennifer were there, and they started going back and forth about, oh, I applied for this grant, and oh, well, you want to be involved in it? Oh, I'll rewrite it. And in like 10 minutes, I saw what collaboration was all about. Like, it was just awesome. So, okay, well, this gentleman next to me needs no introduction. I'm going to introduce him anyway. Jim Bann, our chief of police, he's doing really great work bringing parts of the community together that have never been together before. So thanks, Chief.
Thanks. Thank you. I've been in law enforcement about 24 years. I would have never guessed when I started in policing that I would spend this much time talking about homelessness. And quite honestly, as a chief, I probably talk about this topic more than any other. I would say that in policing, we sort of represent a kind of a conflict in the community and an evolution. When we started really seeing an influx of homeless folks, it was in around 2013. I started meeting with Terry Gant, who was the founder of Father's Heart, and I remember talking to her about things that were going on and changes in the community that a lot of people in the community were scared about, irritated about, angry about. And I would talk about situations and things that were happening. And Terry would come back at me with a name. Oh yeah, that's Marcus. Let me tell you Marcus's story. And she would tell me, about great traumas and things that somebody had come from. So I would switch to something else of echoing what I'm hearing and what our officers were dealing with. And she'd say, oh yeah, that's Teresa. This is her story. So I'm seeing all these behaviors and sort of angst in the community. Well, Terry knows these people, and Terry would be pushing back with, well, here's that person and here's their story. That sort of tension and conflict has really been what we've dealt with as a police department and sort of the weird place for us to live ever since then. There is fear in a community, especially a community, Oregon City, as we've looked at a lot of other communities dealing with homeless issues. We're smaller than a lot of cities with our concentration. They have more resources. We quickly learned, of course, everybody's heard, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's how we tried to deal with homelessness initially. And we learned very quickly that didn't work. These folks that we were dealing with did not need to go to jail. They needed other things. And so that's where partnership started. And for me, that really started with Terry and learning. That's been a constant evolution. One of the things that we've really tried to do in the city is figure out how do we as local government do our best. One of the things is just understanding what the law is. and making sure that our community, when they're upset that we're not doing enough, that we're educating them, educating our own staff on what should we do, what can we do. Homeless people are not necessarily a protected class, but the courts almost look like them one, and so that's how we treat them. We make sure that we're not treating people and make sure our staff aren't treating people a certain way because they are homeless. They get treated like anybody else sitting on a park bench. The thing we learned early on, and when you look at things that have gone bad in other communities, is it is incumbent on us to be in the boat rowing and paddling in the direction of helping at the same time that we're working for the community who's afraid. So this tension sort of between the stories of these people and who they are, but while all this good work is being done, we are still getting calls. We're still getting neighbors who are upset, usually out of fear or something that they don't see, know, or understand. Some of the things that the city's done, most people are aware that early on we hired an officer who works full-time. All their job is to interact and gain trust with the homeless. And that has been extremely successful. There's a lot of people in our community who will not talk to any police officer, but they will be on the street talking to an officer and say, "Get Officer Haynes here and I will talk to him." Trust. And the same thing for us is the police. We had to learn, we had to gain a lot of trust with a lot of these providers. And this collaboration that's gone on has never been better. I still think we've got a long ways to go. Now that we're collaborating really well, I think what we're going to do in the future is just going to do nothing but get better. The other thing, we've had Val on for, I think, about a year and a half. So we hired a master's level clinician, and so she's embedded with the police department. And so we problem solve with her. She goes out into the community with us in response to calls. Our goal with Val is really only one crisis. Maybe if we know somebody's sort of an issue in the community, getting Val plugged in to get them services, trying to divert them away from the criminal justice system. The other thing that Val really does for us is she trains our officers. Our officers are pretty good at talking to people. But over the years of having Val go out with them and seeing Val talk to them, and they start learning tricks, or Val is training our people. There's a lot I could go into about what Val, and there's some other cities who are bringing people like Val on, and that program's moving forward. But so that conflict I talk about, that is a constant for us, is trying to serve the homeless community the way that we're supposed to, but also trying to respond to the community that doesn't understand or has valid fears. That is something that is going to be constant for us, a constant evolution of always trying to get better. So I've talked enough. Thanks.
Okay, last but not least, we call Vahid the man with all the answers. No, not really. I won't put that pressure on him. But Vahid performs a huge role for Clackamas County, and he really is respected region-wide. This man has dedicated so much of his life to this issue, and he's in charge of our housing, supportive housing services funding that comes through Clackamas County, as well as the program manager of that. So, Vahid, come up and share with us.
Thanks, Dan. Afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back with the Oregon City Business Association. It's been a while. And I've talked about this issue with this group a number of times, so I appreciate the interest and concern you all have had with this over the years. It's funny, Jennifer, when you said you hoped I would talk about statistics, it made me think of Chrissy Finneran and Vicky Finneran. I don't know if you knew them. Mother and daughter from our community, lived here their whole lives, many decades without housing, experiencing homelessness, living on the trail. Vicky was a CNA for years, but she and her mother both struggled with addiction, and they lived without housing. And you mentioned statistics and how things have changed with housing placements. And when I knew Vicky and Chrissy, They were both on wait lists for permanent supportive housing. That's what they needed. They'd been experiencing homelessness for many years. They were both disabled. They both had behavioral health conditions, experienced profound trauma, violence, abuse, attacks, rapes, living outside. And they were on wait lists. We were working with them. We knew them. They were in our lists. And the list that they were on had 2 placements a year maybe, sometimes 3. Shelter Plus Care, a federally funded program. And so they were never number 1 and 2 on a list of over 400 people. Vicky and Chrissy were never number 1 and 2, and they both passed away outside. Just in the last few years in our community. And that's the bad news, right? Homelessness is a traumatic experience that sickens and kills us. I know that this is a luncheon, and I'm sorry to be, kind of the dour person, but I've been working on the front lines of this issue for a long time, and so I remember Vicky and Chrissy and so many other people who are neighbors, members of our community, people who had family that loved them and cared for them, who passed away. The average life expectancy of a person experiencing homelessness in our community is 46. It's 3 decades shorter than for those of us who have stable housing. It's the most significant social determinant of health. If you don't have a safe place to live, that's the most dangerous element of your environment that you're missing. And that's why, as Commissioner Fisher said, we strive to make homelessness rare, brief, and not recurring, because it's dangerous. It's an emergency. My friends and colleagues on this panel and myself, we work in the emergency room of our economic system, right? I mean, if you think about, literally, it's like an emergency room. The households and neighbors that show up and receive services from the officers of the city, police, at the Father's Heart, at LoveOne events, at the ER outreach for the Bob program, are folks that are literally receiving wound care and kind of things for the experiences they have without housing. So we are the emergency room, and we've gotten better resources recently, and we're hopefully not going to see the kinds of things we had with Chrissy and Vicky, members of our community, elderly folks passing away outside on a list for a resource that just never came up for them. Now, I mentioned that there were over 400 people on that waiting list, the Shelter Plus Care waiting list. That's for people who are in need of permanent supportive housing, long-term housing support. Maybe that's a unit in a building like we just opened yesterday, Tequila Springs, or it's a housing voucher, a rental subsidy that can stay with the household for as long as they need it, and supportive services, case management, connection to behavioral health resources, job training, peer support, whatever is needed for that household to be successful in their housing. Permanent supportive housing is a precious resource that has been so very rare in our community for so long. Like I said, the list that Vicky and Chrissy were on had 2 to 3 placements a year. In a typical year, maybe we'd have 30, 35 placements in permanent supportive housing in a good year. As Commissioner Fisher mentioned this morning, since November, with the Supportive Housing Services Program, that's 294 people placed into permanent supportive housing. 294. Vicky and Chrissy would have been on that list. They would have been in the two. I know they would have been. I remember that last time I checked that Chrissy was 17. She died of a stroke on a bench on 82nd Avenue. So we are now working with resources that will house Chrissy's and Vicky's, and that's the good news. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the last time we did a street count of people experiencing homelessness in Clackamas County, there was 1,166 people. 1,166 people experiencing homelessness. In January this year, we did another street count. There were 597. So that's a 49% reduction in the number of people experiencing homelessness in our community. That's a big deal. We haven't solved the problem. We'll always need an emergency room of our economic system. People will be in crisis. Things happen. When you're in the emergency room because you hammered a nail through your thumb, or you broke your kneecap, you got in a car accident, and you look around the room, there's all kinds of people in the emergency room from all kinds of backgrounds and walks of life. Stuff happens to all of us, right? So when you think about someone experiencing homelessness, it's just like with you when you're in the emergency room and you see someone suffering, waiting for their care. That's kind of like what we're doing. We're working with people in that ER, the ER of our economic system. But with the resources that we have, we're making a difference. I was with Brandi and Glenn with Clackamas County, Central City Concern, did the same thing, did Central City Concern lead this morning. Tukwila Springs, the first bond-funded project that we opened in Clackamas County, opened yesterday. 48 units of permanent supportive housing. That's great, 48, right? As I mentioned, that's like more than the total placements in such a resource in a whole year, just created new. And this morning, the first neighbors of ours moved into their new home, and we got to welcome people to their new home and got their key and opened their door. Richard had been living homeless for more than 10 years in our community. His mother lives in Gladstone. His grandma's house is in Gladstone. Richard has a home. He's out of the emergency room. He's safe. And so that's the work that we do. I mean, I could talk about a lot of programs, lots of great housing programs and resources that the county is administering. The Metro Affordable Housing Bond is building. We're going to be building more than the 1,700 units with that resource. With the supportive housing services money, we'll be able to provide permanent supportive housing placements to more than 300 households this year. That's amazing. There's 597 people we counted experiencing homelessness, and we can place 300 of them into permanent housing this year. We're talking about an end of this problem of chronic homelessness in a timeline of a year or two. When I started in this work, it was a never timeline. We're just trying to lessen the suffering is what the work was about. Now it's actually like, here's your keys. So I'm sorry to be so heavy, but it is a heavy issue, and the lightness that we are able to bring with these new resources and new housing makes a big deal. It's really about saving lives. So that's what I wanted to share.
I know many of us have wondered, what's happening? When's it going to get better? Okay, we wanted to give you a little hope today. There's still so much to do. There's always going to be so much to do. But I tell you what, the wave is coming. It's cresting. Like there's a lot coming, and I wanted you to get really a sense of that and what's going on. So I've got some questions. I'm just going to shoot down the panel if you want to answer, or if you've thought you've answered already, skip or whatever and pass it down, and we'll go through some questions. And if you have questions out there, we're going to jump to your questions here in just a minute. So feel free to jot something down on the blue card. So and some of you have done some of this already, but share a compelling story about the time when your agency were really able to make a difference in the life of a person, neighborhood, community, or all above. Like, when did you really feel like you made a difference?
Okay, good. Well, I like to think that we make a difference in all the communities we work in. I'm sure we do to some degree. Something that comes to mind not too long ago, I mentioned our Caring Contacts Emergency Department follow-up program. One of our peers made a phone call to someone who had recently discharged from the emergency department, who originally presented in crisis with suicidal ideation, and his name was Tony. Tony was a middle-aged gentleman, had a home, a wife, was a vet tech, very happy. Through a series of unfortunate events, lost the home, lost the wife, lost the job, and here he was in the emergency department with suicidal ideation. He was suffering from alcohol addiction and didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. Was in and out of the emergency department. Finally, our team got a hold of him. Stayed on the phone with him for over an hour. And I tell you all this because Tony wants me to share his story. It makes me want to cry. So, stayed on the phone with him for over an hour. He said that was the first time he felt like someone listened to him. I mean, think about that. In and out of the hospital, through all these different systems, and the first time someone listened to him. Said he was going to drink a bottle of vodka and take the pills that he had. Our peer was able to get the crisis team there, was able to go there herself, And today, Tony is living in sober housing. Tony has a job through our community connections. We were able to initially place him on the Blanchet farm, so he got to be with animals again. He, got to use his hands, work in the woodshed. Once he was able to sort of rest and recover there for several months, we were able to use our connections to place him in that sober housing to help him get a job. And today, he is doing really well. He is working on getting his driver's license and getting a car, and has said that he wants to look at becoming a peer support specialist. He has felt like this program has been so impactful for him and wants to be able to give back to his community. So that's something that always sticks with me when I think about community connections and lives we touch.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Becky. That's full circle. So, Brandi, I know you've got several. I've heard some, so go ahead and tell us.
I'll keep it to one. But I am answering questions 1 and 2 at the same time.
Okay.
Okay. So my story is really focused on collaboration among multiple organizations. So back in January, Glenn and I were contacted by Stephanie Rawson with Metro. She had been out. So if you didn't know, during the pandemic, Metro paused clearing camps out in Newell Creek. And at about the beginning of the year, toward the end of last year, they started posting camps and clearing again. And so Stephanie had come across someone who had built a cabin. It has a legit door that locks. It has an address posted up above it. It's decorated beautifully. This person is a master carpenter. In fact, there's some really beautiful woodwork that he's done in our city. And he had built a cabin-type dwelling. He's also the individual that had the chicken coop, had a cat, and still has the cat. But when Stephanie first made contact, he said, "Hell no, I'm not going. You're going to need to bring in the helicopters and the guns." And she said, wait a minute. I'm just here to have a conversation. Let's try this again. And he didn't really want any part of it, but she listened. And so he shared some of his story with her. And she asked if she could make a referral to Lead and LoveOne to go out and start building a relationship. And he said yes. And so Glenn and I traipsed out there and made our first contact. And over the next couple of months, we went out no less than 25 times. Now we're probably up to 30, 35 times. And a couple of months into it, we had prearranged when we were going to go meet with him. And he had, which he was not supposed to do, he had built a sunroom to host us. And it had beautiful log beams, and it was sheltered and had this beautiful view of the canyon, and he had coffee brewing for us, and he was just ready to host us. And so that was the setting for beginning his housing assessment. And without the partnership and being able to reach out, so one of our first steps also was to be able to connect with Amy Jo Cook, our community paramedic with Clackamas Fire, to come out and check in with this individual. We worked with ODOT as well. So we have monthly meetings that our community prosecutor facilitates with ODOT and Metro and Lead and Father's Heart, as well as Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, OCPD, Housing Authority. We're all on the same page talking about the same individuals and how we can strategically support them into their next steps that they've identified that they're ready for. And this individual that we've worked so hard to build a relationship with now has a housing voucher, and we get to start looking for a long-term house for them where it will be legal for them to build sunrooms and host us for coffee and probably have chickens again.
I will probably answer 1 and 2 together. I think those are in connection. So we cannot do this without a collaboration of partnership. So for me, I believe we make a huge difference in our community. We restore hope and dignity to those we serve. And so I could share a ton of stories, but I would like to share and highlight a story that I have permission to share. And collaboration, it took a heavy collaboration. So Latasha had been living on the street since she was 15 years old, struggling with addiction, a mother who had died due to a heroin addiction at a very young age. And this young lady was doing everything that she could do to survive, struggling with abuse and all of the things that come with being homeless and on the streets. She became pregnant and was homeless and pregnant. This is very recent, so some of you had probably seen her walking around and on McLaughlin. She had reached out to Brandi and said, "I can't do this anymore." I had been working with Latasha for several years. Brandi reached out to me and said, "What can we do?" She reached out to LEAD, "What can we do?" LEAD was able to get her a referral to Letty Owens. Letty Owens is a Central City Concern program that houses moms and their children and also does an addiction treatment program at the same time. They're an amazing program. This young lady, there was going to be a gap of time, though, between when she was being exited from the hospital to when she could get into this program. It was going to be 5 days. So we all came together in collaboration and said, what can we do? So we all pooled our money together. We got her a hotel room. We worked with DHS, and DHS said, okay, if you can come up with dedicated volunteers that will provide 24/7 line of sight vision for her and baby, then we will keep the baby out of the system and we will allow her to move on to Letty Owens. So we again pulled our resources, called all of us together, and volunteers stayed with that mom 24/7 while we loved on her and supported her, and we all brought her supplies. We got mom over to Letty Owens. Mom has almost 90 days clean and sober. The state has stepped out of the picture. She is no longer involved with the state, and she will get to move forward with her baby and being a mom. So that's, for me, what making a difference in collaboration looks like.
So I'm going to hit on 1 and 2, and I'm going to do it a little more from an operational standpoint, just because I feel like these are very emotional. All these stories are incredible. But also there's a part of me that's always like, all right, what are we going to do? And whatever we do, the plan has to work. And I think what I've seen recently in terms of collaboration, we started having meetings that we never had before, where we got everybody in the same room, and just sitting back and watching all the people at this table, our officer, people from our city, start talking. Somebody would mention an individual, and bing, 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 everybody knew who this person was, and so now you have everybody talking about not the problem, but the people and the individuals, and somebody, generally in the group of people that we have, knows how to get to something that's going to work for that person. So I sort of thought, why in the heck have we not had these meetings 8 years ago? Nonetheless, it really shows to me that as a community, as we're starting to hone in and get more organized and just put the right people in the room and let them figure it out, get out of their way, get them the funding they need, get them the resources they need. This is not a problem that gets solved. I've learned this. It is not a problem that gets solved as a whole. Every one of these cases is different. When you say homeless people, they're as individual as everybody in this room. They run the spectrum. So for me, the success that I've really seen, that I've gotten excited about, is the way that we are collaborating. I think some of these folks have been collaborating a long time, but we're finally in the boat. And I think that that's what I really look forward to seeing more of, with money coming in, more people paying attention to this, is more collaboration is really starting to net things. Brandi talked about that Newell Canyon. If that happened, in 2013 or 14, we don't have a whole lot of people there that are really going to be able to impact the problem. But as you have people coming in who are maybe putting down signs or laying down the law, or you're going to have to get out of here at this point, then you have people coming in behind with a much softer hand and sort of making sure that we're not going to miss something. There might be something that police or somebody who's putting down a sign from Metro telling somebody you are going to have to move. But then we have people who are coming in behind them like Glenn and Brandi, who are maybe going to get along with him good enough, or they're going to trust them enough that we're going to be able to connect them to some sort of service. It really takes a village, and I think the village is coming together better than it ever has.
Yeah, I mean, I think rather than tell another story about another individual or household, because thinking about sort of what my agency, what the county has done that's made a real impact. So the thing that strikes me, that comes to the top of mind, is the pandemic and the resources that, there's a reason why there's a 49% decline in the numbers of people experiencing homelessness since 2019. And a lot of it has to do, first of all, with the pandemic and the new resources that were made available to counties and states to combat the pandemic. And then, of course, the follow-on of the supportive housing services dollars that we were able to sustain some of those gains that we were able to make with the initial pandemic investments. So where that made the biggest difference was in a program called the Motel Shelter Program for folks experiencing homelessness that were most at risk of severe infection if they were to become exposed to COVID, people who were very old, who had compromised health, people with disabilities. So we prioritized the most vulnerable folks that we were aware of in the community experiencing homelessness, and booked a lot of hotel rooms over a couple of years. I mean, initially it was an emergency response to COVID, right? I mean, when COVID started in March, we were all like, well, I guess we'll be back to work in 2 weeks. And we need a safe harbor for these very vulnerable people in the meantime. And it didn't turn out to be back to work in 2 weeks or 2 months, and now not even 2 years. So we had to really provide that safe harbor for those most vulnerable members in our community for a long time. And that would have been fantastic in and of itself. 2 years of safety off the streets for very vulnerable people who were kept from being exposed to the virus. But because of the supportive housing services dollars, we had this population of folks who were highly vulnerable. We already knew these were the most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness. So they were really already prioritized at the top of a list, right? We already had a list. We already had them sheltered. We already had the Father's Heart and our partners in the community working with them one-on-one. So we were able to use our supportive housing services dollars to then move them into permanent housing, to permanent supportive housing. So that 132 households from homelessness, unsheltered homelessness, to a pandemic emergency response hotel room, now to a long-term permanent supportive housing placement. That's remarkable. 132 households of very ill people who are now permanently supportive housing. So that's good.
Okay, we're going to move on to audience questions because I want to make sure that we address some of these. So, Jim, this is for you. What are the current laws in Oregon City in regards to public camping? Is it acceptable in certain places?
In 2 minutes or less. There's two main rulings. There's a Boise ruling and the Grants Pass ruling. I'm oversimplifying, but the Boise ruling basically said that people are allowed to sleep somewhere unless you've got a place for them to go. They can sleep on the sidewalk in public spaces. Grants Pass was a little bit different in that somebody started saying, okay, you can sleep there, but you can't have your tent there. You can't camp there. You can sleep there, Boise, but you can't camp there. Well, the Boise ruling, or excuse me, the Grants Pass ruling said, well, for somebody to sleep, they need to be warm and dry. So they get to have their camp in their tent. So that's what we sort of try and abide by. So very recently, I just got a complaint. Pictures, there's a guy asleep on a sidewalk right next to City Hall. He's laying down. He doesn't have a camp. He's just laying down. People can get by just fine. Hey, what are you guys doing? Get that guy out of there. Well, I always use this analogy. If my grandmother was sitting there playing cards on the sidewalk, you would not call and tell the police, get rid of grandma. It's a homeless guy with you may not like looking at that, but he's just there really taking a nap. So in that case, that's the kind of thing we get called about all the time. That is not against the law. He's not blocking anybody, and so we sort of try and do this dance between what is camping and what is somebody just resting and sleeping. There is no black and white, but we always try and err on the side of what is reasonable. That's about as clean answer as I can give you on that.
Okay, very good. For Father's Heart, this is a yes or no, I think. Does the Father's Heart have a cooking center?
We do not. We actually rely on the community to provide us meals. So Wonderful and Gracious Hearts bring us a meal daily, Monday through Friday, to feed over 100 people.
Okay, this is a good question that maybe, what can we do as a state to continue the success we've achieved we have achieved to continue this progress? Anybody want to talk about what the state could do? Vahid? This is your shot. We have a couple of people here from the state, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Mental health services, Chief Band said. Yeah, I mean, Oregon, as we all know, lacked sufficient resources in that regard. Permanent supportive housing, we can solve chronic homelessness, that long-term homelessness that is so dangerous to vulnerable people. We can solve that in our communities. It's about investing in permanent supportive housing. I'm really glad the state has done that. The Tukwila Springs project that we opened yesterday also had funding from the OHCS, Oregon Housing Community Services, for permanent supportive housing. Invest more in permanent supportive housing, right? Mental health resources, as Chief Band said. I mean, the state can help us a lot. You know, we have a $2 million dedicated allocation from the state this year from the legislature to Clackamas County for shelter. That's fantastic. The state has, this last legislative session, increased the funding for several critical programs that provide resources to people experiencing homelessness in broad areas. I'm not going to name all the programs because it sounds like alphabet soup, but that's been really positive for Clackamas County. Mm-hmm. One thing that we're learning here in Clackamas County and in our region that I think the state probably is going to increasingly have interest in is Built for Zero, an initiative that helps communities really get a handle on the numbers of people experiencing homelessness on any given day, who they are, what are their names, where are they, who's connected with them, what's the barrier to their experiencing housing stability, who's doing what to remove that barrier? Well, then remove the barrier. So it's about focused attention with a community of partners on a list of people that's maintained on a day-to-day basis so that we can really drive to zero numbers of people experiencing homelessness.
I'm going to add one thing. Because you're asking, there is Measure 110 passed, which decriminalized drugs. And one of the tenets of that was that there was going to be treatment. There's a 2020 study I read that said Oregon was 50. We ranked worst in the entire country for available drug treatment. And mental health, we talk about mental health, and everybody just assumes that it's a given, that there's nothing that can be done. And I realize it's a big elephant, but you got to start somewhere. And then the other one is the addiction services. We absolutely have to have more addiction services.
Yeah, that's where my mind went, was mental health and addiction. I mean, it's just a critical part. And part of the SHS funding, it overlaps because that's a homeless issue, but it needs a broader funding base.
I would like to say something too.
Okay.
I think whatever decisions are being made, whether it's with the state or any small community, we have to remember to include the voice of those we're serving. So we all shared stories. We all talked about the great work that Jennifer's doing, and a lot of what she's doing is based off of her own lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Listening, asking, and then listen. You know, that's where our group started. You have to do that. Yeah. Okay, maybe 5 more minutes. I'll get Kent the last 5. What resources do we have or need to install to help prevention? And I'll just say that the SHS funding, a lot of funding will go to prevention. Rent assistance is probably the biggest bucket that's needed. So how do you find out who's just about ready to get evicted? You know, there's some ideas being kicked around on how we can find out about notification of eviction, so maybe we can come in and bolster that person back up with some rent for 2 or 3 months. So I think that's the quick answer to that is assistance in housing before someone is evicted. And it's critical because if people are coming into homelessness while you're trying to get them out, the bucket's always full. You've got to slow it down and help them out. Okay, this is, I think, for Jim again. Do you believe that standard police officers should still respond to situations involving homeless individuals or those in emotional crisis rather than a specialized team tailored for this kind of intervention? You kind of addressed that a little bit, but yeah, go ahead.
I think there are times that there are certain people who call, we don't even send officers, we just send Val. I think you're going to see more and more of that. There are other cities are starting to hire their own, like Oswego, West Lynn. Canby just got funding for it, and we're kind of forming a coalition of people who are doing this embedded with police officers. There are some calls, if you talk to those clinicians, will tell you, I'm not going to a call without an officer. For obvious reasons. But we're in the business of moving in that direction and doing as much of that as possible while keeping everybody safe. And if officers do go, it's quite often that inside of 30 seconds, Val is saying, you guys can go, meaning the officers can leave.
Okay, this is an interesting question. When I drive past or stop near a homeless person with a sign, what is best thing to do for them? Give them food, money, encouraging words, or nothing?
All of the above.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Whatever moves you.
Eye contact, hello, how are you? Money is how you acquire things that you need in this society, right? And if someone is going to use the money for this or for that or for this, I mean, you get a paycheck. Your employer doesn't know what you spend your money on, right? It's your money. When you give someone money, it's their money. If they're going to spend it on a beer, that's up to them, right? That's my opinion. That's where I'm coming from.
And if you're not comfortable with that, don't give them the money.
If you're not comfortable with that, say hello, make eye contact, wave, offer water. It's always great to keep things in your car, especially in hot days. And it's just a great thing to keep in your car. Have a water bottle, have some granola bars, that kind of thing.
Very good. Question on veteran services. How do we deal with veterans and those with special needs in the county?
Really, with veterans and with other folks, it's really about peer support, is having the lived experience and expertise specific to communities that we're serving is the best practice. It's the best approach. So with veterans experiencing homelessness, we have the Veterans Village, which is staffed by a veteran-specific agency called Do Good. Their staff are veterans. We have a veteran outreach specialist at Social Services who is himself a veteran. So we really try to provide that culturally specific, lived experience specific services for folks that they see themselves in the person they're working with. So we do that with other agencies as well. For Black and African American folks, we have culturally specific agencies. For Latinx folks, we have culturally specific agencies and so forth.
Okay. Oh, yes.
One last question, 30-second answer. What, in your opinion, is the most important thing that should be done?
Build a bigger village. It takes a village. So get involved.
Get involved. If you want to do that, it's a great segue. The cards on your table, you can give us your name, email, if you're interested in anything. I want to say a special thanks to Glenn. Glenn works a lot with all these partners up here with the LEAD program, Clackamas County Sheriff. So you're seeing what's happening in the arena here locally. Great thank you to all you people that are just, you're working so hard. Trust is the key. When Brandi walks down the canyon with coffee, she's building trust. And a month or two later, they're making coffee for her. And then a month later, they're in house. That's how it works. You build trust. I want to thank Kristen, Shelley, and thank you for your agencies, the city and West, for loaning you to us, for helping this. It was awesome. Thank you, Tony. And Richard, great wingman. Thank you for all the work you did on this. And let's keep it rare, brief, and not reoccurring. There you go. It's all yours.
And thank you, Dan, for doing a great job of moderating the panel presentation today. And so it's up to each and every one of you. this isn't a business. This is something that truly comes from the heart. And I think what you've heard today, the emotional stories, these people have compassion and passion to make a difference. So we urge each and every one of you to continue to follow up. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I know the county, Mark, you were the only county commissioner that was here when we were doing the introduction, so I'd like to recognize Clackamas County Chair Tootie Smith, Clackamas County Chair, or not Chair, Martha Schrader, and Clackamas County Commissioner Sonia, and thank you for all of your comments.